Okay, so now we've done music and culture, and we've done money and learning, and now we're going to do giving and golden.
I won't run off the stage. Thank you very much. It's great to be part of this. You know, when I looked at the list of speakers and participants, it was a little bit daunting. So it brought to mind the story of the woman who gets on a very crowded bus here in Toronto. The bus is just jam-packed, and it's a very hot summer day. She pushes herself into the bus, and she goes into the middle of the bus, and there's no seats to be had, but in front of her is a little girl sitting on a seat. And she says, "Little girl, if you had what I had, you'd let me have your seat." The little girl, taught to respect her elders, got up and gave her her seat. Then it was so hot that the little girl pulled out a fan and started to fan herself. The woman looked at her and she says, "You know, little girl, if you had what I had, you'd let me use your fan." And again, the little girl, handed over the fan. About 10 minutes later, the woman gets up, pushes her way to the front in this crowded bus and shouts, "Driver, stop, stop, I live here." He says, "Lady, we don't stop in between stops. She says, "Stop, stop. If you knew what I had, you would stop this bus right here." Jams the brakes on, she gets out, and as she steps onto the pavement, the driver turns to her before he closes the door, and he says, "Lady, what is it that you've got?" She said, "Chutzpah." So I figured as your 37th speaker and your 9th before lunch on a Friday, it maybe takes a little bit of chutzpah to assume that you're going to be passionately interested in my passion. I'm not actually going to talk about giving, although I am passionate about philanthropy, and I'm passionate about United Way, and I'm passionate about cities, etc. But I realized that when I looked at all of the things that I really care about, what I really care about is about making change. And that's why I studied history. There are two types of people that study history. Some people study history because they really want to understand what actually happened in time. In other words, they want to understand things as they actually were at a given point in time. But other people study history because I guess, like following the dictum of Santayana, they really believe that if you don't understand history, you're doomed to relive it. And I guess I was in that camp because I always studied history to understand the lessons of history. How is it relevant? How is it relevant to the human condition now? Well, as I was completing my studies in history in the late 1960s, this city was at a turning point. And this is where my story for today starts. It was at a major turning point, and some of you, I know from having met you, were part of this too with me. Basically, we felt threatened from two main enemies. One was the Spadina Expressway, poised into the heart of the center of the city, about to eviscerate the center of the city. And then developers were doing what we call blockbusting, that is destroying neighborhoods. And we understood that neighborhoods were at the center of Toronto's character. What made Toronto was unique was the fact that we had kept our neighborhoods, kept affluent people living downtown. And we felt threatened by this, and I became part of that fight. And in 1971, when then Premier Bill Davis announced that the Spadina Expressway was stopped, it was enormously empowering for many of us. And what did we learn from that? We learned, I guess, that a few people, not that many, a few people could make a difference. And we learned, in effect, that you could fight City Hall. And following that, I became involved with the election campaign of Mayor Crombie, and I know that David is speaking tomorrow, which was transformational for me and for this city. Because I think out of the legacy of the Crombie era came the reputation that our conductor was talking about earlier, which brought him in the 80s. The legacy of the livable city. We discovered mixed-use development. We discovered how to keep people downtown after 5. We discovered the importance of building affordable housing, and we did build affordable housing downtown. And we did the right things. And so I remember Fortune magazine coming out in the mid-70s, and they called this the greening of Toronto. And we were viewed with envy by everybody around the world. Somehow we had got it right. We had kept our livability. Now I have to say that this reputation, which still exists. In fact, if you look at lists today, we are still at the top, 4th, 5th, 2nd, even 1st, of most international rankings. Some see us like Peter Ustinov as, New York run by the Swiss. We have the excitement of New York, but we're organized. At any rate, this isn't exactly notes here. I know you're not supposed to bring notes. What this is a slide, but only I can see it. Now, because otherwise I want to stay within my time frame. At any rate, we are now still living off a reputation. But what I'm here to my message this morning is that, in fact, we are at another turning point. We have been at another turning point since the late 90s. In other words, 30 years after the first turning point, which we dealt with successfully, which we addressed, and we did the right things, we're now at another turning point. We're not yet doing the right things. In 1996, I was called upon by Premier Bob Rae, then Premier Bob Rae, and as you know, the mandate switched in the middle, so I actually reported to two premiers, which was an interesting experience. But I was asked to chair the task force on the Greater Toronto Area. An amazing experience. What a luxury, what a thrill to be able to sit back, take a year and think, study, analyze. And it was interesting what we found. The problems at the time seemed overwhelming. The property tax system was broken. 40 years it hadn't been updated. It seemed to be broken. And all the various reports that had been done, no one could fix it. And business was starting to leave, and we had evidence because of the inequities in the business taxes between businesses in the city and businesses outside the city. And sprawl was proliferating. It was getting out of hand. We had no guidelines, no policies in place to manage growth in an integrated and coherent way. And we were wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on roads and sewers, et cetera, and we weren't planning in a careful, rational, and efficient way. And our governance system seemed too complicated. People felt over-governed. They felt confused. We had too many governments involved in providing too many services. And so basically they said, Anne and your team, figure it out. And actually, I believe that we did. I want to tell you what we learned, because I want to contrast what we learned then and what's happening now. The first thing we did, I guess perhaps being an historian and loving history, is I looked at what we had done right. We had done a lot of things right. First, in 1953, we created the two-tier federation, Metropolitan Toronto, which really is known internationally as the jewel in the crown of metropolitan federations everywhere, because it allowed the region-wide government to handle responsibilities that should be region-wide, like police or social services or transit, but it allowed the responsiveness at the local level to deal with sensitive issues like zoning. Sorry, it's just a bit dry, so excuse me for a sec. Oh. You know what, it's technology. Thanks, I'm sorry. We did other things right. We invested in education. In fact, as taxpayers in the City of Toronto, we paid more on our taxes willingly because we felt it was important. And it turned out that keeping our eye on the education system was critical in keeping people wanting to live downtown and keeping their kids in the public school system. We developed a transit system, thanks very much. We developed a transit system that was, and transportation system that was balanced. We spent as much on transit as we did on roads. This is an important lesson. We understood the need for social equity, so that while we in the city used our tax base to finance the schools and the sewers that were needed in North York, where the lawns were turning brown because they didn't have water, the entire new city understood the need to spread the burden for social housing. Imagine if we hadn't built, not that we did it necessarily the right way, we know better ways to do it now, of course, but imagine if we had tried to take all the people in Jane Finch and Malvern and Flemington and bring them all downtown. I suspect we wouldn't be having this conference here because it wouldn't be very nice around here. But we didn't. We spread the burden for social housing. We spread the burden as social services got added to Metro's mandate. We spread the burden for social services, in effect pooling the cost for those services across Toronto. These were very, very important lessons. There's another important lesson, and that is that the province in those years was vitally interested in Toronto. The province invested in Toronto, everything from Ontario Place to the ROM, to the Art Gallery, and of course, the very significant decision of stopping the Spadina Expressway. Well, when we did our study, we did something that hadn't been done before, which is that we analyzed the economy of Toronto. Not just the City of Toronto, but the entire Toronto urbanizing area, the GTA as it's known. And what we found out is that we are a single economy. This was one of the big ahas. We are a single economy. Now, there's a very detailed big study, but let me just give you one illustration. You can make a car in Oakville, and we can make cars in Oshawa, right? But there's 1,200 companies throughout all of Metro that supply all of the parts and services that enable us to produce cars in Oakville or cars in Oshawa. And we did that for every sector, and the same held true. And we found out, too, that although now you see a 416 and 905 split and polarization and all kinds of tension, but the truth is we are linked together, and our fortunes are linked together. We looked at over 70 American cities, and we found it to be true that how the suburbs do and how the cities do are inextricably linked. For those of you that are interested in the actual methodology, we found out that household incomes in both of these places, although they're wealthier in the suburbs than they are on average in the city, as is true of our situation here. They rise and fall in lockstep. And so really we're all in it together. Our fate is together. So the second learning was that we needed a regional or a region-wide governance capacity that matched the economic reality of the region. And so we recommended a Greater Toronto Council or a Greater Toronto Services Board, or it doesn't matter what it's called, to look after things that could only be done region-wide, like environment and conservation, like transportation, like police. And we recommended that, and that was a very important learning. The other important learning was how much sprawl is costing us. We had the funds to do the state-of-the-art study on the cost of sprawl. I believe, I can say this, it sounds immodest, but there was a team, and I had a task force team, so it wasn't me, but we were able to, with the support of the finances we had, to do what I believe is the state-of-the-art, and still is, study of costs of sprawl. And what did we find out? That by building inefficiently, by spreading our development all over, by building little boxes in effect, not creating compact, transit-friendly, user-friendly communities with a little bit more intense development, but still highly livable, by not doing that, we're wasting about $1 billion a year, $25 billion over 25 years. And I said to myself, boy, this will absolutely do it, because I could see that governments that are clearly and explicitly so interested in efficiency, so interested in cost savings, will not, absolutely not, miss the chance to save $25 billion. The same $25 billion that we can invest in art and culture and schools and hospitals, all of the things that create our quality of life. And the final aha, and this was a big one, and it was actually personally very gratifying to be able to prove with hard research what I had always intuitively believed in my heart, is that our major competitive advantage in a global economy is our quality of life. I went to New York and to New Jersey, and I interviewed the locator firms that bring businesses to Toronto, and I asked them, why do businesses come? And then we interviewed 85 chief executive officers who had come. And we asked them, why did you come? And they said, and they were, as it turned out, they said, because my wife wants to, and they were mostly men as it happened. But because their wives wanted to be in a city that was safe. And they wanted good schools for their kids. And they wanted the good health care that we have in this country. And they wanted parks, and they wanted livability, and they wanted the tour, the amenities. That's why people wanted to be here. That's our competitive advantage. They don't come for low wage rates, labor rates, and they don't come for low taxes, but they do come because we offer something that's very precious. So these were very important learnings for us. Well, what's happened now with that report and since that report? We know that we've had amalgamation in Toronto, and there are different points of view on that. I would have personally favored 4 cities with a larger core, but it doesn't matter. The main point about it is not whether amalgamation or not. The main point is that we did not maintain a meaningful 2-tier system. The Greater Toronto Services Board is a name and search of a function to do. I mean, it has a mandate so-called for transportation, but it's not happening. So we don't have the 2-tier system. We have more sprawl, unrestricted sprawl, because there are no planning guidelines provincially, and we have in fact removed the controls that were there. In fact, at the current, the way it is now, I believe that 40% of all development applications, if they aren't dealt with in time, and by the way, I want to say I'm not anti-development, but I just think that there has to be some protection. If it's not dealt with in time, now go to the OMB for decision. So we've actually lessened the controls on sprawl, notwithstanding the fact that we know that just in the roads and sewers and pipes alone, we're wasting about $12 billion over the next 12 years. Money that could go to health, education, social services. We have more cutbacks in education, and those stories are on the pages of the media every day. We're neglecting transit. In fact, transit has been downloaded onto the property tax, along with more of welfare. And although the province took education up, it's not a net-net for Toronto. It may be net-net in other cities, but it's not, in other communities, but it's not here. And Toronto is fiscally, from a fiscal point of view, is not sustainable right now. And finally, we have a situation where the province seems less interested than it should be in the fate of Toronto. I was 2 years after, am I okay for time? Am I okay for time? Perfect, okay. About 2 years after the GTA task force, I was asked to chair the task force on homelessness. And in many ways, it's an extension of the story, because I began to understand much more deeply than I had. Even as in my role as head of United Way, I learned new things about the depth of poverty in Toronto, the causes of homelessness, and I'll just tell you one quick story to illustrate the main point about that I want to make, that these problems are fixable. We analyzed 9 years of data that had never been analyzed before. We studied the 126,000 people who had been homeless over 9 years in Toronto. And we found out that 17% of the 26,000 homeless in any given year are chronically homeless. That is, they've been homeless for 6 years, 5 years, 9 years. They just go from shelter to shelter. First, we were very depressed. It was a Sunday afternoon. We saw the results of our study. We were very depressed. And then we went, wait a minute, no, this is good. This is good. If we fix the system for 4,000 to 5,000 people, we've fixed it for half the problem on any given night. And you know what? We haven't done it yet. But you know the $200 rebate that all Ontarians just got? That's worth $285 million. We could create the 14,000 units that our task force recommended for those who need supportive housing and have $100 million left over. We can fix this problem. That's the main point. This is not too daunting for us to fix. Well, obviously, I guess my passion is it's time to invest in cities and specifically in Toronto. We have disproportionate levels of poverty. I can't give you all the stats, but it's hugely disproportionate. Double the level of family poverty in Toronto, in 416, than outside the area. 36% of kids are poor in Toronto compared to about 22% across the nation. So we have disproportionate problems. 84% of the new growth that's coming to the GTA is going to 905. So we're only getting 16%. But 75% of the social problems, by any indicator, be it single parents who are poor or kids at risk or whatever, are here. So you can see that there's a problem. Well, let me conclude with an optimistic thought, because I am actually an optimistic person. I guess it sounded a little bit gloomy there for a minute. There's a new book out by a man named Malcolm Gladwell, and he wrote a book called The Tipping Point. Have any of you read it? Quite a few. Good. As I understand, the tipping point is really talks about how disease spreads, how epidemics spread, and really how it only takes a few to, disease will grow. He actually studied sexually transmitted diseases in, I think, Baltimore, and there was a growth like this. And then due to a variety of factors, including the destruction of the housing projects so that the population that was having the problem got dispersed, it tipped upwards. And he said that, ideas spread the same way. They start off with a few people, and then they spread like a contagion. He said, all you need are mavens, in terms of the social epidemic, that is to spread ideas, to change the climate of opinion, to create the climate that we want to fix these problems. All you need are mavens, okay, people who know the problem. You need mavens, connectors, people who know who to talk to, and salespeople, or communicators, people who know how to tell the story. And it occurred to me as I was been here for the last 3 days that we have in this room perhaps the best collection of mavens, connectors, and communicators that I've ever seen under one roof. Now, in addition to having the mavens, connectors, and the communicators, you need a compelling idea. So my compelling idea is it's time to fix the problems, to invest in this city, which after all is 50% of the gross domestic product of Ontario, 20% of the nation's economy. We have everything it takes to be the greatest city region in the entire world. It's time to take it seriously. It's time to take the opportunities that we have here, not to lose the precious things that we have, not to forget the lessons of the past. And I guess I want to present the message in a compelling way. I'm going to go back to the first time we had a turning point. And I don't know if David is here, but we in the David Crombie election, we needed money. So we went to, connecting with entertainment, and art, we went to Herald Town. And he gave us a lithograph of a tree. And underneath, we adopted as our theme, Toronto is a living thing. Let's treat it with care. Thank you.